Massachusetts, Deval, who is spearheading a multi-million-dollar grassroots outreach effort to empower voters of color. The New Jersey and Virginia governors' races are 3 days away. Both states have largely Democratic electorates, but also have a history of occasionally electing Republican governors, much like your home state of Massachusetts, where voters elected Mitt Romney and the current governor, GOP, Charlie Baker, just to name a few examples. So what is your take on these races, Governor?
Well, first of all, I think these are critically important races, but I think we have to remember all races are important. And in fact, all of them today are critical. These two in particular, because under Democratic leadership in both New Jersey and Virginia, people have seen their government responding to them, doing things to help them help themselves, try what government can do to make a whole community, a statewide community, more fair. Every race is critical because what we've seen is that the Republican side, particularly the hard right, which is more and more of what the Republican Party seems to stand for, is out of ideas. They have concluded that the only way they can win is by cheating or by discouraging voters. So you see in Virginia, for example, reports of all these Republican so-called poll watchers showing up to try to intimidate voters from coming out. And you're going to see this same sort of thing in the same way we did, Reverend Al, as you well know, 30 and 40 and 50 years ago when black and brown people were just beginning to assert through the Voting Rights Act their right to vote. So what we're trying to do with Bridge Together, which is a new initiative we've just recently launched, is to invest in existing grassroots organizations, community groups that know the neighborhood, know their neighbors, are organizing relationally, as they say, using modern tools, building networks that are permanent, not just in time for elections, not just through a given campaign or for a given candidate, but building community and electoral power on an ongoing basis in some key states going forward.
Speaking of Virginia, the Washington Post reported this week on armies of so-called Republican poll watchers, who you referred to, who have descended on early voting stations wearing Republican badges in Democratic counties, supposedly to oversee voter check-in and voter tallies. Many African-American voters are understandably wary of these kind of citizen efforts to monitor the vote. Do you think there's an element of voter intimidation going on here, and what can be done about it?
I think it's all about voter intimidation, Reverend Al. I think that's, there is no, there's nothing behind this except the big lie and the notion that if Republicans use their bully tactics in this way, as they have in so many others, that people will be discouraged and will stay home. The early vote tally has been pretty strong in Virginia so far, as I understand it. That tends to favor the Democrats. And so, of course, you see a whole bunch of vigilantes being sicked on the voters to kind of watch over their shoulder and make them uncomfortable. And frankly, this goes back to the importance of organizing at the grassroots, right?
Absolutely.
You need your neighbors, you need your posse around you, you need your friends and your community members to make sure that folks understand they have a right to cast that vote, to do so confidentially and privately, and to do so with integrity and without fear. And
without interference by some of these poll watchers. But Governor, your organization, Bridge Together, is an outreach effort to help empower and educate voters of color in key swing states on issues like criminal justice, education reform, and women's rights. Historically, black Americans in particular have been disenfranchised and feel left out of the political system. Tell me briefly, what do you hope to accomplish ahead of the midterms and beyond that when it comes to connecting with black voters?
So if you think about the best campaigns, Reverend Al, you know that they have an element of grassroots organizing as a part of the campaign. But for a lot of campaigns, that means sending people and resources in the 8 weeks, let's say, before the general election. There's a different kind of organizing, which is about permanent grassroots organizations. It's about community engagement. And it may involve, you know, issues that are going to be on a federal candidate's, as a part of a federal candidate's campaign, but they may also be about issues with the local school or issues about how to deal with food insecurity for neighbors in the community. It may just be a way of building community. The point you made in the remarks you gave right before you had me on about how we are all accountable for each other, that's what a community is.
Right.
And that gets built. That's an intentional thing that gets built by organizing. So what we want to do is make it possible for those groups not to have to sort of flex up just in time for GOTV to get out the vote, but to stay bulked up, to keep organizing all the time, well before the next election, so that they build a sense of common cause, of common understanding. They overwhelm the obstacles and barriers being put up to keep people from voting or be intimidated at the election site, and they understand at the end of the day that they have a stake in their neighbors' dreams and struggles as well as their own.
Now, while I have you here, Governor, I want to ask you about the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Now, Mr. Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 people and injured 1 during the Kenosha protest last year. His actions were caught on tape during the evening when there was no rioting, no looting going on. Yet, a Wisconsin judge said that prosecutors cannot, I repeat, cannot call those who were killed by him as victims, but can be labeled as looters and rioters, even though there were no looting and rioting going on at the time of his shooting. I'm deeply disturbed by this. They lost their lives and cannot be called victims. I know that you served as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Department of Justice under President Clinton. How can the judge bar the prosecution from calling the deceased victims, but okay them being called looters?
You know, I read about that story, and as a former civil rights official and as a lawyer, you know, what I want to do is understand the whole context for it. But my first reaction is my.
Yeah.
It is. You know, you talked in the remarks right before I came on about the ways we dehumanize people who are incarcerated, how we forget that 97+% of the people who are in will come out one day, and that we are doing less and less to make it so that they are safer and less dangerous when they came out than they went in. Well, in fact, we do that with people who are not incarcerated.
Well, I repeat, this man shot these people at night, killed 2, injured 1. There was no rioting or looting going on at the time, but they can be called rioters and looters at trial, but they cannot be called victims. Former Governor Deval Patrick, thank you for being with us, and we will stay up on your grassroots efforts.